Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. So indeed, my name is Karen de Leener, cardiovascular market specialist at Materialise. And today I would like to talk to you how virtual patients can improve medical device design and what lessons we've learned from the last decade. So to start with, and to make sure that you're all energized after the break, I'm going to start with a question. What do you think that all of these medical device companies that are listed here have in common? So you can use the chat, but you can also just reflect for yourself and give it a moment to think what all of these medical device companies have in common. And I will actually immediately jump to the answer. Which is that all of those medical device companies, and actually many more, incorporated the use of virtual patients as a standard tool for their R&D over the last 10 years. Now you can imagine why would they be doing that? What is so interesting about virtual patients? Well, actually, most of you might know that it's a challenge to design a device that will work equally well on everybody. So on one hand, patients come in all shapes and sizes, but on the other hand, medical devices usually have a limited number of sizes, but they do need to fit all the people on the bell curve. And one key aspect of variability is, of course, the anatomy of each individual patient. We see that a good understanding of the target anatomy and how it varies in the population can be helpful for many aspects of device design. A thorough understanding of the anatomy can lead to safer, better performing devices. It can also improve the usability for the physician. If you understand the anatomical variability, you can optimize logistics. And of course, last but not least, a better characterization of the anatomy can speed up regulatory approval. So to sum up, a good understanding of the anatomical variability early on and verifying the design against that variability as you move forward is a very important factor for a successful release and performance of your device. Now, I've been talking about virtual patients, and I do think that most of you are aware with the term, but still I want to explain the concept. So it all starts with taking medical images. These CT and MRI ultrasound images can then be converted to a digital 3D model. So then we no longer speak of a physical patient, and hence we call it a virtual patient. And with these virtual patients, you can then do a lot of different things. It all depends on your goal and your project. But just to give you some ideas, you could, for example, take measurements, can be either in R&D to do 3D analysis, but can also be later on in clinical operations for 3D planning. Another aspect is virtual implantation. Then you could also 3D print the model, have it in your hands, understand it from all angles, use it for benchtop testing, physician training, and so on. Important to note here is that there is always a one-on-one relationship between the virtual patient that we created and the initial physical patient. So that's why we call this an individual virtual patient. And then on the other hand, if you would look at multiple physical patients, you would get multiple medical images and hence multiple 3D models. Then we can use a method that most of you might already heard about, statistical shape modeling, so that all of these patients can be combined in a general shape model. Now, in this picture that you see over here, it's an aorta, but it can, of course, be used on multiple anatomies depending on your interest. What we can then do is we can vary the modes of variation to get the average patient, but also look at worst-case scenarios to really cover that whole patient population. Another benefit is that now we're not only limited to the physical patients that we have medical images of, but what we can do is we can also interpolate between the models that we have. So this is what we call a synthetic virtual patient, because there is no longer a one-on-one relationship with the initial physical patients. The same as for individual virtual patients, those synthetic ones can be used for 3D analysis, virtual implantation, simulation, benchtop modeling, and so on. The big difference is that now you can generate multiple scenarios, really from average to worst case, to really cover that whole patient population. Virtual patients can actually be beneficial at multiple stages of the product life cycle. To just give you two examples, in the beginning of R&D, you can use virtual patients to quantify your target anatomy and have relevant design input. These measurements can be made on individual virtual patients or on synthetic virtual patients, as I just explained. And then after device development, virtual patients can be used to verify your prototype and then really to pinpoint very quickly if there is any design iteration needed, and then move forward ultimately to animal and human trials with confidence in your device design. And those tests, they can either be virtual implantations, simulations, or really physical testing on a 3D printed benchtop model. Now I've covered the concept of virtual patients. I like to go over the learnings, what we learned over the past 10 years. And I'll do that based on some examples of projects that we did. The first one is immediately a very interesting example, in my opinion, because in the beginning they did not use virtual patients. So it's an example of DJO taper fill hip system, which is a short stem design for less invasive anterior approach. It's cementless, so it's very crucial that the implant fits well to the anatomy. And DJO started with a limited launch, which unfortunately did not really turn out how they had hoped. They had multiple fractures. 2 surgeons even stopped the use of the product. They had to throw away $500,000 of inventory. So that's when they turned to virtual patients. And what happened then is, first of all, we made an average, statistical average of the femur model. And then we virtually implanted the DJO taper fill device. And that revealed actually that the geometry of the implant didn't conform to most of the anatomies in certain areas. So of course, this information was then taken in-house by DJO to redesign the implant. And sure enough, the implant is now performing exceptionally well. And also nice quote at the bottom. Since then, they use virtual patients as a standard tool for all their R&D. Then second example, a totally different field, bit more my cup of tea as cardiovascular market specialist. So this is a study that we did together with Abbott Structural Heart. And the goal of this study was to assess actually whether the shapes from statistical shape modeling are more generalized than the shapes that you have from individual patients. So really the difference between the individual virtual patients and the synthetic ones. And here we used the right heart to analyze and generate test models to assess actually the feasibility of positioning and implanting Abbott's TriClip for the tricuspid valve. And the results of this study show that those synthetic virtual patients obtained from an SSM are more generalized representations of the entire population than an individual one. As a third example, it's actually not specifically for one project, because it's something that we do for all the projects that we do. So for the past 2 that I explained, but any of the other projects that we would do, it's the validation of the SSM. So we do multiple validation tests We have a whole quality dashboard, so to speak. I just picked two relevant ones. The first one is a leave one out method. This shows how well the SSM describes patients that are not part of the initial population. So how easily an SSM can approximate another patient. And then the second one, the compactness, this shows the relevance of each mode. So if the SSM would be very compact, then it can describe the geometrical variation in the patient population in just a few modes, and hence you don't need to use all the modes. And at the bottom of the slide, you see a nice quote from Ingrid Duprat from iSchoolab on the creation, validation, and also the use of SSM for a total knee implant design. So to summarize, I promised you some learnings from the past decade. So from the first example, we actually learned that it's crucial to have a clear problem statement. For DJO, the DJO example, it was clear that they wanted to find out why those fractures happened and how they could redesign a version 2 of the taper-filled system. So I would say in general, the use of virtual patients is very powerful, but if you don't have a clear problem statement and you don't have a question of what you want to solve, then you will not find an answer from those studies. And then from the second example with Abbott, we learned, of course, that it's very useful to use synthetic virtual patients, but on the other hand, also how important it is to have a good collaboration, not only between the MDC and the virtual patients experts to ensure that the results of the population study can be directly tied into device development, but also between the MDC and the clinicians to verify the clinical problem statement, to get early feedback on your device, and of course, ultimately to improve patient care. And then lastly, the past decade has taught us that validation of the results is very crucial to ensure that better results can be used in device design. So until now, I've only talked about the past decade, and you might wonder what the next decade will bring us. I can just tell you one of the trends that we're seeing. The main one is that companies are really embracing this technology and are even starting to take this technology in-house. So to take this technology in-house, you don't only need the knowledge, but you also need the tools to create those statistical shape models, to interpret them, and also to link them to your device development. And what you see now on the screen is a visualization of such a tool to interpret your SSM results. I won't go into too much detail, but you can play around with the different measurements and parameters. For example, if you have a certain stent size, then you could lock the diameter of the aorta to that specific measurement, and you can then see how the rest of the measurements and the shapes vary with that measurement being locked. So that actually concludes my presentation. I would like to thank you for listening, and CADFEM, of course, for the organization and for the opportunity to present. I'm happy to answer any questions if we still have time. Otherwise, feel free to connect via mail or LinkedIn. Thank you.
So thank you, Karin de Leener. Yes, there are questions, and I would like to bring them together in one question. Okay. Do you have a database of virtual patients that can be used from customers already?
Yeah, so we do have a database, but usually it's a collaboration between what you have and then what we have. We do have a database, but it can be Let's say you're developing a device for tricuspid regurgitation and you're really targeting a specific severity of tricuspid regurgitation. It might be that we need to add some of your data sets to our database to come up with more patients to have a statistically relevant analysis.
Mm-hmm. And is it available as a service from Materialise?
Yeah, so it's actually both a service, that's how we started, and now we also made it available in the software to really create it yourself, because we see that trend of companies taking this technology in-house.